Well, a shot at diplomacy. Iran has agreed to take part in nuclear talks. The country willing to engage in face-to-face negotiations after facing intense pressure from Israel and the West to abandon their nuclear program. This comes as the drums of war are beating louder as Israel threatens to use military force and target Iran's nuclear site. President Obama has said that military intervention is on the table, but wants to give sanctions time to work and diplomacy a shot. So, is a diplomatic solution really possible at this point, or could failure to negotiate lead to more justification to go to war? Well, to help answer this, Reza Marashi, Research Director for the National Iranian American Council. Welcome to the show, Reza.
Thank you.
So negotiations are on the table. Are you optimistic that this can work?
I mean, I'm always cautiously optimistic that diplomacy can be successful because it's a process that if you invest in over a sustained period of time, then the two parties will eventually be able to figure out how to, a meeting of the minds can become possible. But after 3 decades of little to no communication between Iran and the United States, there's no question that it's going to be a very challenging task that all sides are facing. And you know, I think being on the precipice of war has really focused the attention of the various decision makers in various capitals, and focus them specifically on the need for all parties to compromise. And like the introduction to the show said, talking the talk is one thing, but now it's time to walk the walk. And in the run-up to these negotiations taking place, there's a lot of backroom politicking going on to see if we can make this happen. So I'm optimistic.
But do you think we can expect any significant breakthroughs? I mean, do you think Iran will really abandon its nuclear program in its entirety like Israel wants it to do?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, there's a difference between what the United States and the international community are asking for and what the Israelis would prefer. And these negotiations are going to be an opportunity to figure out how to try and square that circle. I think it's safe to say that any honest and objective analyst would agree that Iran will not give up its nuclear program in its entirety, but it will agree to limitations that are monitored and verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Those are two very different things. And you know, moving forward, it's going to be in a process that's predicated on trying to get on the same page, figuring out what are the kind of compromises that all parties can live with. And if we don't reach the kind of compromises that I think all parties would like, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble because the push for war isn't going to stop.
And that is what the fear is, that if these negotiations fail, if there is not a diplomatic solution, that it will further justify going to war with Iran.
That's true. But I think it's a bit of a false premise when people put that idea forward, because diplomacy isn't supposed to produce instant success. You're supposed to invest in a process over a sustained period of time where confidence-building measures that are reached in the interim can facilitate trust building, because there's a huge trust gap right now between Iran and the United States. So it's unreasonable. Even President Obama himself said it's unreasonable to expect quick success. But investing in this process over an extended period of time can yield results, and I'm confident that if all parties come to the table with the best of intentions, which they should now, given that the conversation has turned to war, we can reach a peaceful solution to this crisis.
And as you just said, diplomacy should take time, will most likely need time in order to work. But Israel doesn't want time, or doesn't want to give Iran more time, because they're afraid that more time means it's going to let Iran develop their nuclear program and eventually obtain a weapon. So they want this to happen quickly.
They do. Even when I was serving in the U.S. government, the Israelis were one of a handful of countries that were never really interested in giving diplomacy a fair shake. And that's one of the many reasons why Israeli interests don't align with the Obama administration's interests on the Iran issue. And they've done a very good job of trying to take actions that would lessen the possibility of diplomacy being successful. But the Obama administration understands better than anyone right now what's at stake. And he should be commended that over the last 48 to 72 hours, he's taken multiple steps publicly and privately to push back. And I'm hoping that we're going to see more of that continue, because if it doesn't, they're going to continue to try to bully him.
And in the event that the talks fail, could it speed up the process of military intervention?
I mean, it certainly could. I mean, defining failure is going to be something that I think all parties at the negotiating table, and the Israelis who won't be at the table, are going to try to do if the talks don't produce even a modicum of success in the interim. But that being said, because the parties realize what's at stake right now, defining failure is going to be a lofty task. for people that aren't at the table, including the Israelis. And I think the parties that are at the table are taking the necessary precautions and laying the necessary groundwork to try to ensure, as best they can, that won't be the case.
And we are hearing a lot of this very extreme war rhetoric coming from Israel. Do you think that they really want to find a diplomatic solution to this, or is it possible that they are pretty set on wanting to go to war with Iran?
Well, it's very interesting. When you look at public opinion polling, the Israeli population nears 60% not supporting military action if it's not done in tandem with the United States. And that's very different than the words, the rhetoric that we're hearing from the Netanyahu government in Israel. So there is a bit of a schism. I think the Obama administration understands that, the international community understands that, and they're going to utilize it to its advantage to try and beat the Israeli pressure back a little bit and, put the proverbial wild animal back in the cage.
Now, do want to bring attention, Iran's top leader today is hailing President Obama for advocating diplomacy. He's calling it a window of opportunity. He also said, quote, "This expression is a good word. This is a wise remark indicating taking distance from illusion." So does this provide some hope, especially since he does have a final say on matters within the country?
Well, things are so bad between the United States and Iran right now that any little thing that resembles this could be considered a positive step. But like we were discussing earlier, actions are going to speak louder than words. And I think it's time for not only the supreme leader of Iran, but also the president of the United States and everybody else that'll be sitting around that negotiating table to get serious and to invest in a process of peace, because none of the governments involved in this crisis have been very honest with their populations about what the cost of war would be. And I think if they were informed properly of what those costs would be, or anything even close to what those costs would be, they would adamantly oppose it.
All right, well, it looks like this could be a step at least in the right direction. Hopefully the talks will lead to diplomatic solution and war does not eventually happen. Thank you so much for coming on the show. That is Reza Marashi, Research Director for the National Iranian American Council.